Ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome on this sunny summer day for the launch of Metasystems, a book written by Nils van Dam and Dado van Peteghem. My name is Suyin and I'm delighted to be your host this morning to inspire you to read the book and use the many tips the book will bring to you. A digital lounge with more than 200 participants. I'm convinced that this makes the writers very, very happy. And one thing is for sure, you're not here for the champagne during the networking reception. We, of course, hope all to have real events back very soon, but I'm sure you will meet the authors soon to congratulate them on the great work. But let me introduce you to Dado van Peteghem, for those that never met him. I know Dado as a firm believer of ecosystems, and he's convinced that companies go further if they are working together and thinking together about that future. Besides writing, he is, of course, an entrepreneur and a founding partner of Scopernia. Everything he does is based upon passion, and he likes to share these passions with other passionate people. Dado helps organizations with their digital operations, outlining their vision and strategy, and setting up collaborations with startups, incubators, and of course, technology partners. In the past, I think 10 years, Dado has transformed many organizations by injecting digital into their DNA and activities. And for me, it's his empathy, that is one of the strongest characteristics as an entrepreneur. He is convinced that real physical contact, let's call it humanity, is actually what people are looking for in this digital era. He believes a lot in the man-machine collaboration. This is not Dado's first book, of course, but again, he decided not to write it all by himself, but to look for a co-writer. And this time, he decided to work with Nils van Dam. And I had the chance to meet Nils for the first time some years ago on a TV interview that I had with him for Canal Z when he was still the country manager of Unilever for Belgium and Luxembourg. And Nils is a seasoned business leader, passionate about change management and building purpose-led companies. He is an excellent strategist who knows how to make a team collaborate to reach the same goals, and he also knows how to make companies future-proof. Recently, he became the CIO of Milkobel, the biggest dairy cooperative in Belgium. And during the lockdown, Nils, you told me that one of the hardest things was not to be able to hold that newborn grandchild of yours. And I hope by now you were able to hold this little boy.
Yeah, it happened last Sunday.
Great. Writing a book together, guys. I think it's a little bit like a temporary marriage, enjoying the ups and the downs, reaching a common goal of happiness, but respecting one another all the time. But before I have some questions for both of you, I would like to give the floor, the digital floor, to Lisbeth from Die Keure, because every book has a publisher. And for Metasystems, Lisbeth was in charge. Lisbeth, I am very curious to hear this morning what your message is for the writers today.
Thank you, Suyin. On behalf of Die Keure, I would like to thank everyone for attending this online book launch of this brand new book of Dado and Nils. Be it that in other circumstances, we probably would have organized this event on an inspiring offline location. I am very happy for the possibilities that this digital era brings for organizing online book launches. Even after 10 years in this business, I still get very excited with every book we can release. But today, I mainly want to leave this virtual stage for the authors who have done a magnificent job in conceptualizing and writing this book. I want to especially thank them for the opportunity of publishing this book together. Some of you might know that in 2018, we also published the previous book of Dado on corporate venturing, which was a great success and is still very relevant today. That was the start of a great collaboration between Dado and our publishing house that is now also followed by Nils joining in for this book. Personally, I am a strong believer of working together to achieve greater things, putting together strengths to set the bar much higher and to achieve more common goals. 1 + 1 can be 3, but it might also be 4 in some cases. And as the authors point out in their book, all partnerships, be it between organizations or simply between an author and his publisher, should always be based on trust. They call it even the holy grail of partnerships in the book. Reading through the book myself, I found this small paragraph that I want to share with you today. Trust is as ungraspable as it is important. What a damned combination. It's like the air you breathe. You use it all the time. You can't live without it, but try to control it and you'll fail. Worse, trust is like love. You want it, you can't live without it, but if you try to control it, you'll end up brokenhearted. After these nice words, I want to simply take this occasion to thank both Dado and Nils for having found trust in our partnership. Thank you.
Very, very nice part that you have been reading to us, Lisbeth. And I can imagine that for Nils and for Dado, these nice words are really heartwarming this morning. And before we go on, I would like to tell all of you following us, and you are many, to tell you that unfortunately, we will not be able to take all your questions as we want to keep this event about an hour, but we created a LinkedIn group. So in case you have questions after today or after reading the book, I suggest you go be part of this LinkedIn group and post your questions there. And both authors are going to get back to you very soon. And this will create, I think, a bigger communication between all of us. Nils and Dado, both of you think we are in crucial times, which is, of course, very exciting, but might also be frightening for most of us. And with your book, what you want to do is prove us that with the right mindset, businesses can accelerate, innovate, and create desirable future horizons. And my first question is for you, Dado. When did you realize this importance of partnerships and collaborations?
Yes, thank you, Suyin, and thanks also to Lisbeth for the nice introduction. And thanks to all of you who are watching on YouTube or Facebook. Thanks for making the time for us and joining our book launch. It's a true pleasure that we can give you the highlights of our book. And basically, the idea started when Nils and myself both traveled to China last year in 2 different groups. But we came back very inspired by the fact that in China and in Asia, there are a lot of networks and business networks that form ecosystems where sharing is really the true DNA. And we were really inspired, and we started thinking more and more about the power of networks in business. We were also empowered by our partner in the Middle East, the Chalhoub Group, which is a large retailer in beauty and fashion products. And basically, they say partnerships are the core of our business model. So they form JVs, they create licenses with other partners, and that's really how they thrive. And what we also learned from the Chalhoub Group is that partnerships are really, as you already said, based on trust. And how they do that is that before they actually create a partnership, they try to write down the intent of the partnership, which transcends the commercial part. So for them, it's not only about how much revenue can we make together or how much profit can we make together, but also how can we have the right intent and how can we be in this together for the long term and create mutual value. So that for us was really the starting ground that make us think, can't we inspire other people also with that network thinking? Now, in itself, it's not really new because already a lot of organizations are betting on partnerships. But what we have seen is that if they do so, it's mostly in the sidelines of their business. And so what we try to do with this book is to convince organizations that partnerships should be or can be part of the core of your business model. So we believe that after all, it's together that we build the future, and that's what we try to do with this book.
Thank you. Indeed, partnerships are very important, and you also had very inspiring partnerships for this book. And I have a question for Nils. As you were not doing this only the 2 of you, we've heard Lisbeth already. Could you tell me who else would you like to thank for this book then, that have worked with you?
Yeah, we will thank many people and do so at the end of this webinar. But I would like to thank in the beginning Annelies and Jill, and I will tell you why. Annelies and Jill are the co-writers, the copywriters of this book. And we came up, Dado and myself, with a creative way how to write this book. Dado and myself would build presentations, create content, and then tell these stories to Annelies and Jill, and they would write it down. Now, what happened is that not only are Annelies and Jill fantastic writers, but they started to interact, to challenge, and this became jamming sessions. And it changed the complete nature of this book. And without them, this book would not have been what it has become. So thank you, Annelies and Jill, for being part of this phenomenal journey. The other people we want to thank are our interviewees. We interviewed many people, and 15 of those people entered the book. And this is a very eclectic group, going from professors over students to DJs and operators of the special forces. They all inspired us about trust, leadership, and partnerships in different ways. And I'm sure that when you discover their interviews, you will be gathering also insights as we did during our writing process.
I see that Jill is also thanking you in our live comments, and she liked this journey, and it was a pleasure for her. In the book, you say, Nils, that collaboration is the next wave of transformation. Why do you think this is like this?
Yeah, yes, indeed. We think that the war of all against all should end and is ending. Most company leaders were trained in the past to compete against somebody, to fight with a lot of war language. This might have worked in the past, but I think we are beyond this phase. And what we learned in China is that the world and the DNA of the new economy will not be a competition between companies, but will be a competition between ecosystems. If you are not part of an ecosystem, you will not be able to compete in a proper way. And why is this? If you make a combination of all small and big partners playing together, you will become very agile. The world is so complex that you can't be a specialist in everything, but you do need specialist insights. But also a partnership, a network is very difficult to disrupt. Maybe one of the little knots will be disrupted, but the others will take over. And we think that partnerships are not only stronger, but also more solid. Yeah. So the next wave, we had waves, the internet coming, digitization, transformation. The next wave coming will be the wave of collaboration.
So we are ready to surf on that new wave of collaboration. But Dado, why is collaboration now more needed than ever before?
Yes, Suyin, so there are a few reasons. And of course, one of the most important reasons is that we probably all agree that we face a quite uncertain future. There is this great book from Nicolas Taleb, The Black Swan, in which he talks about these random events that happen and that have a massive impact on society and on business. He says that the COVID crisis was actually a white swan because in a way it was predictable, but in general we all agree that there will be a lot of white swans and a lot of black swans going forward. And this is linked also to wicked problems that come to us. So we have, of course, the COVID crisis right now, but we also have climate change that is around the corner. And so these wicked problems are very complex problems that, in our opinion, cannot be solved by one party, one entity, or one company. And then the last part is, of course, the rise of big tech. So think about what is happening in the US with Amazon, and then in China and Asia in Alibaba. So we see that a lot of these big tech players are entering many industries, many different sectors. And this is an interesting graph showing the cash of the big technology players and how it grew over time. And as we all know, in this uncertain time, cash is often king. And so they were, of course, let's say, in the best position to deploy innovation because they have so much cash. Now, in all this turmoil, what you also see, and this is very interesting, is that there is a huge demand for purpose, both from customers and consumers, but also from employees that are willing to select a job in which they are not just being paid a nice salary or getting a nice car, but where they also like to have a job with a higher purpose, and they want to work for a company that actually has true relevance in society. So this is a nice quote from Jacques van der Meijen, the CEO of Port of Antwerp, who said to us in one of the interviews, the view of the top should not just be the bottom line. And so we were really inspired by that. And if you look back to the big technology players, you see that there is a lot of backlash happening right now. So think about WeWork, which was once one of the rising stars, the unicorns of the US. Basically, what happened is that it was all in all a very financially driven machine with a lot of disrespect for employees and disrespect basically for a higher purpose. And you see that the empire fall down. The same is happening with Facebook. You see a lot of brands and companies who are stepping out of the advertising model of Facebook because they don't agree anymore with the ethical norms and the impact Facebook has on society, often in a negative way. And so I think that the time of these financially driven machines is behind us, and both customers and employees demand for more than just profit businesses. This has long been the mantra at Facebook: move fast and break things. It was all about speed, going fast, beating the competition. And so we think that the counterpart of this will be move purposely and fix things. So we think that a lot of companies need to make this shift. And I think this could be in the benefit of the more traditional businesses, that you see that big tech firms are facing quite some backlash because they are so financially driven. Now, of course, profit is not wrong, but long what we have seen is that there was a dilemma between for-profit businesses and not-for-profit businesses, and both hated each other in some kind of way. And what we believe is that it's not a choice. You need profits as an oxygen for the growth of your business, but you also need to think how you can do good and well at the same time. And so what we believe is, if we think about meta systems, the reason why we called it meta is because we believe that there's an extra layer compared to the ecosystems that we already know. And one of those extra layers is the concept of more than for profit, where we don't make a choice between profit and doing good, but we try to make it in the heart of the business and connect it with each other. And so you see already quite some nice examples. This is Unilever and Procter & Gamble, who are competing for the attention of the customer in the front end, but they also know that they have a challenge in sustainability. So what they're doing is they work together in the back end to bring plastics out of the economy. So for the bigger purpose, they work together, but they still compete in the front end. And I think that's a very interesting dynamic. You also saw it happening in the Black Lives Matter debate. So this is a tweet from Nike where they said, for once, don't just do it. And it got retweeted by Adidas saying, we're in this together. So you see that for a bigger purpose, companies can and should work together, even if they're competing in the front end. And this is something that we all also learned from a great interview we had with Rudy Moenaert, who is a professor in strategic marketing at TIAS Nimbus in the Netherlands. And he said it's not only important where and how to compete, it's also important to know when to compete. And so we believe that's the future in meta-system thinking and the meta-system mindset. So for us, if you think about partnerships and how to build those networks, we need to transcend the purely commercial partnerships and try to be partners in purpose. And by the way, purpose is not the cherry on the cake. It's not a nice to have. We believe that if you have a strong purpose, that you can attract the right talents, because as I said, especially younger generations are really looking for businesses to have a higher goal. And we also believe that if you make sure that your purpose is embedded in your products and your services, that it can be a business driver to attract the right amount of customers. So our message is, how can we be partners in purpose?
Very, very clear, and indeed purpose should not be the cherry on the cake. Something else that I noticed in the book, Nils, is that you mention that we think too binary and too polarized. Why is that so?
Yeah, what you see it across the society, also in politics, that people come up with simple and simplistic answers. They go to extremes, yeah, and forget how complex certain problems are. And I will give you some examples. There should not be an opposition between nature and technology. They can also be combined. There is no opposition between the I and the we. Yeah, they should be combined. There is no opposition doing things now and later. They should be combined. And when you combine the opposites, then you find value and progress. The easy thing is just to go to an extreme and polarize and think that the world will be better when you are right in a fighting mode. But there is a little wisdom in the extreme positions. There is a lot of challenge and opportunity in bringing the opposites together. And if we solve those opposites, what we call the meta paradigm, as a society, we will have made real progress.
Talking a lot about meta systems already, the title of the book, but Dado, could you explain us briefly what for you both a meta system actually is?
Yes, so meta is the ancient Greek word for beyond. And so that's really what we try to do with meta systems, is how can we transcend certain positions and how can we move beyond? And there are a few different perspectives. So I already talked about how can we move beyond profits without, of course, excluding it, but how can we attach an extra layer to that? How can we also move beyond the expected? How can we move beyond the short term? So I already said in the introduction that a lot of partnerships are on the sidelines of the business. And my feeling and Nils' feeling is that a lot of these partnerships are meant to create short-term value. So how can we get as soon to revenue or profit together? And of course, again, that's important, but we believe that we should focus on partnerships for the longer term. It's also beyond power play. A lot of the partnerships that you see today, or the ecosystems, you have one dominating player who is dominating the smaller ones, and there's often one player on top of the food chain. So if you think about Amazon and Apple, for example, typical examples of ecosystems is that all the other partners involved have to listen to the rules that are set by these players on top. They control the data, they control the financial streams, they allow who is getting in and who is not getting in. And so we don't think that that is the future. We need to go for equal partnerships. And the last part in moving beyond is also try to move beyond the usual suspects. So typically, when people look for partnerships, they scout in their own value chain, either upstream or downstream. And a nice example that probably many of you have followed in the news is the partnership between Proximus and Belfius, who are shaking hands to create a new innovation in neobank that should be a counterweight against the big fintech players, the new startups, and of course the big tech that is more and more also entering the financial markets. And I think it's a very nice example of convergence of two industries with unexpected players combining their forces to create innovation. And so if you look at it, you see that partnerships often are at a very low level, let's say, and at the sidelines of the business. We had a very interesting interview with Chris Burggraven, who was the former CMO of AB InBev. And so together with him, we came to this idea of a partnership pyramids based on the hierarchy of needs, let's say, of Maslow. And so the very first level that we see of partnerships are preferred suppliers. And often companies call their suppliers partners, which is nice, and it can be a partnership. but it's a very transactional relationship where one party is just doing work on request of the other party. So that's level 1. The second level is what we called the defensive partnerships. So a lot of companies are trying to protect the past. Think about, for example, the alcohol companies. They form an alliance to create a lobby and to put pressure on law to protect their business. And there are many different other examples of defensive partnerships. Then you have the offensive partnerships, where it really is about how can we do collective innovation. I think the example of Proximus and Belfius is a very nice one in offensive partnership thinking. Most of these 3 levels are one-on-one partnerships or one player dominating the other. And so as from level 4, you enter the real ecosystems where you have many different players involved to create what we've called collective business. But we call them the walled gardens. And why? Because, as I said, most of these gardens are ruled by one player on the top of the food chain, and they control everything. So everything is very controlled, which leaves little room for creativity and little room for serendipity. And so there are no equal partnerships, and therefore we defined level 5 as the true meta-system layer, where we think about collective imagination. So how can we be creative together, especially in the time that is ahead of us? It will be really needed to bet on collective imagination in equal partnerships for the long term. And so that's our definition of the meta system.
Which is very clear to me. But what I wonder is, are these meta systems then only for those very big corporations?
Yes, that's a very good question. We believe that the big corporates have the biggest leverage. So if you combine them, probably we will have the biggest line of defense, let's say, against these big tech organizations. But it's not about the large organizations only. What we think is that it's about big collaborations with big aspirations. But that can be very local. So it can be local entrepreneurs, it can be local ecosystems in which we believe immensely. So we think it's a combination of the large ones with the small ones, as long as we are in it in equal terms. And basically, if you think about it, your family, you could see it as your smallest meta system. It's a small scale, but it is the biggest project of your life. And so I think it's a nice definition. There's a lot of trust that you need in a family to work well. You know each other very well. You're in it for the long term. And so it's a pure meta system. So on a very small scale. Even if you go one step further, it also applies to individuals. We had a very interesting conversation with Jurgen Ingels, who is one of the most famous entrepreneurs of Belgium. He's a startup and scale-up investor. And he said, your network is 100 times more important than your expertise. So before, if you had to create value in a company, it was about what you know. How can you protect your information and make sure that by protecting it, you become as valuable as possible. In these new times, he said, it's not about what you know, it's about who you know and how you can set up the right combinations and the right connections, which is something that is happening already quite a bit in the startup and scale-up ecosystem, but not so much, unfortunately, in the traditional or corporate business world. And so we believe that it's not just about the big ones, it's also about the small ones, but even as individuals, we believe that we really need to think how we can build our personal networks.
Okay, so it's not only for big corporates, it's actually for every single one of us, if I understand very well. What you're saying is that trust is one of the cornerstones to create that meta system. And I wonder how Nils would explain how we can build that trust.
Yeah, Dado already explained that meta systems are partnerships between equal partners. And to maintain this is more about culture than about strategy. And trust is needed in the middle to make this meta system work. Now, there is this famous saying of Ernest Hemingway, the best way to find out if you can trust somebody is to trust them. And this is where it all starts. Companies, people, leaders who engage in a meta system, start to build it, should first trust give trust to the other parties, and then try to build something from there. We did some deep dives in some guidance how to build trust, and we came with 7 ways to build trusts, and I will highlight a few. The first is to speak each other's language. Many business leaders don't understand each other. Yes, they speak the same language sometimes, yeah, or some kind of English, but they have different stories inside. They have different business models. They use different abbreviations. Yeah, so you should not assume that you can understand a company and you can relate to a company just understanding the English. You should go a bit further. Another element is being personally involved. Building a meta system, building partnerships is not something you can delegate. It's the personal task of the CEO, yeah, to be involved and to spend time. And that's the third rule: is contact creates trust. This is one of the most proven social laws, that if people know other people, be in contact with those people, then they get much more tolerant to each other. And the most extreme views, the hate views, are mostly with those who have no contact with other communities, other people. It's just hearsay. So the more people are brought together, yeah, they will start building trust. And that's also valid in partnerships. Leaders should spend time to each other. And time has become a very precious resource. Everybody is so busy nowadays that they don't have time for anything. They don't have time for letting things happen. Positive Assumptions, one of the most inspiring books we read during the preparation is the book of Rutger Bregman, De meeste mensen deugen. I think the English translation is most people are good. And indeed, 99% of the people are good, have positive intent. And we only focus in the news for obvious reasons to all the aberrations and the exceptions. But the rule is that most people are good and having good intentions. The sixth rule I would also want to highlight, and it's about being transparent. Transparency is a necessity in building a relation. Does that mean that you have to put everything on the table at once? No, you can also be transparent about what you are not going to be transparent about, and explain that you are not going to give your personal financial situation, or you're not going to give your secrets of formulas or processes. And if you just explain that, this creates a certain openness and it will build trust. I want to end with Nelson Mandela is a person that has inspired many of us. When he was in jail, he learned to speak Afrikaans with his guardians. And the famous quote is, if you talk to a man in a language he understands, that goes to his head. But if you talk to him in his own language, that goes to his heart. That's exactly what Nelson Mandela did. He spoke Afrikaans to the Afrikaners. He started to love rugby, which was the sport of the Afrikaners. And in that way, he brought the nations together and formed the Rainbow Nation. And that's what leaders have to do when they build partnerships, is understand each other, speak each other language, start by trusting, and the meta system will start building.
Nice to have these 7 ways of trust where we have to look at and see how we can incorporate them inside ourselves. One of the things you are saying also in the book is that before you go out there looking on the outside, what you need to do is look in the inside. Dado, could you elaborate a little bit on these thoughts?
Yes, sure. So it sounds strange, but before you actually get out of the building, you need to do some introspection. And so we already talked about that doing well and doing good combination, which for us should be at the heart of everything. So, and then we see 3 domains for a company to see how they can get ready to actually engage in the meta system. And the first domain is you need to be a purpose-driven company. If you don't have a purpose yourself, it's very hard to find other companies that can tap into the same values or the same North Star as your organization. The second part is you should be ready for collaboration, which sounds easier than it actually is. So a lot of companies are very complex. Therefore, we pointed out you need to be simple, which is, by the way, something we learned from the interview we had with the Special Forces operators. They said, we are always confronted with very complex settings, always very dangerous, always very unexpected things can happen. And so there are a lot of different elements involved. There are the ground troops, there are the aviation people, there are people in the water. So how can you deal with such a complex setting? And what they said to us is, we always strive to create very, very simple plans. And so by nature, organizations are complex. So you can imagine if you have to combine one complex organization with another, it becomes very difficult. So we need to strive for being simple, but of course not simplistic. And then the third layer is culture first, because in essence, partnerships are not being built between companies, they are being built between people. And so, of course, before you can engage with the culture of other organization, you need to have your own house on order, so you need to have the right culture. We will highlight a few of these 9 elements, but of course, the time is too short to go into full detail. But I want to give the word to Nils to talk a bit more about purpose-driven, and especially the Perpetuum Mobile, which is about the business models of the future.
Yeah, many people, when they hear the word purpose, they think of something very fluffy, pie in the sky, tree hugging exercises, something you do at the sidelines if you have time. And this is completely wrong, because purpose is also about making money. Yeah, if there is no link between making money, being profitable, having a good business model, then if it's not intertwined in your purpose, it doesn't work. In the book, and you have to read this yourself, we came up with 7 business models that combine purpose and making money, like the sharing economy, the circular economy, and many more. This is essential for every business that wants to become purpose-led to start building and to start understanding. It's a very difficult task, but the moment you have cracked it, you become in a virtual circle and will be able to combine the 2 essential parts.
Okay, thanks, Nils. Then I will briefly discuss one of the concepts in the collaboration domain, which we called the wild garden. And so the wild garden for us is the opposite of the walled garden. Again, think about Apple and Google, pure ecosystems. But for example, in the US, there is even a term called the Apple risk, which describes the fact that if you partner with Apple, in the beginning, you're super proud, of course, because you can partner with one of the biggest tech companies of the world. But the Apple risk is that as soon as they can suck out the value, they drop you and they take the biggest part of the value that has been created. And so for us, the counterpart of the walled gardens is what we call the wild garden. And the wild garden is a place where you have much more room for creativity. And if you compare it by nature, it's a place where you have the exotic plants that can really flourish. So you have much more biodiversity, much more creativity. But of course, the wild garden is less controllable. And in a very interesting interview we did with Fredo de Smet, who is a curator, a writer, and a DJ, he says there is a parallel with music. If you think about typical ecosystems today, they are like orchestras. So they're all very structured. Everybody knows what to do, but there's no room for creativity. And so he said, basically, the wild garden of the meta system is comparable to jazz. I believe jazz is a good metaphor as it teaches you to embrace the chaos. Meta systems simply have an other organizational shape than what we are used to, and we need to learn to allow for improvisation. And I think that's very important. I think we need to make bridges much more to the creative world and basically also to outsiders who are not typically part of the business ecosystem. And we need to tear down our walls of the walled gardens and engage much more in this creative setting, which we called the wild garden. So the wild garden is, of course, a model where you need trusts. And again, that's the counterpart of the walled garden, where everything is controlled. And basically, there is no real trust between the different parties. So again, here, trust is the Achilles heel, let's say, but also the value driver of the wild garden. And to give you one concrete example, we had an interview with Carla Hilhorst, who is running the R&D Foods and Refreshment Center of Unilever in Wageningen. And she said, before we actually were a walled garden, we tried to protect all the patents, all the ideas we were working on, all the exciting projects we were doing. But by doing so, there was nobody able to actually tap into our ecosystem. So this is a nice quote. In the past, everything was closed and shielded from the outside world by default. And now we do the opposite. We became a wild garden where we start with transparency. And by doing so, you have many people that can build upon the projects that Unilever is working on. And so they create shared value and shared opportunities. So that's for us really the concept of the wild garden, which is a layer of the Metasystem wheel. I will give the word back to Nils to talk a bit about culture, and then very specifically about one of the building blocks there, which is the female soul.
Yeah, female soul. We had a long debate when we discovered the concept, how to call it, because we want to steer away or stay away from the gender debate, which is also a very important debate to be inclusive. But this is not about gender. This is about culture and energies. And Casey Sheehan, the former CEO of Patagonia, he talks about male and female energy. Yeah, the male energy creates more friction. Yeah, is more directive, more focused, and the female energy is more inspired by passion, higher purpose, and collaboration. And we made a slide, that's the next one, about the characteristics of a male soul business culture and a female soul business culture. And what we notice is that most businesses have 90% male soul. And we think that they should become more imbalanced, maybe becoming 50-50 or 60-40. Now, there are many advantages of having a male soul culture, because you are KPI driven, focused, it's about hard skills, but you miss a number of characteristics which become more and more important if you want to collaborate. It's about the survival of the pack, it's about care, it's about intuition, yeah, and those are the elements of the female soul. Now, to make it very obvious that it's not about gender, we wrote a piece about female soul in rugby. Now, most of you that know me know that I'm a rugby fan. Played for 40 years these fantastic sports. But it looks quite violent, men bumping into each other, fighting for the ball. Yeah, and indeed, there are many male characteristics in rugby. But in essence, there is a huge respect in rugby for the opponent. At the end of the game, people form two rows and they clap each other. They have huge respect for the referee. There is no discussion. And also the supporters, they are intermingled in the stadium. There is no hooliganism. They applaud good rugby, even if it comes from the team they are not supporting. They go and drink and sing together after the games, together, not against each other. Yeah, and those are all characteristics of the female soul. So yes, rugby is a female soul sport.
A lot of interesting ideas we heard in this part. Embracing the chaos, very important indeed to find that balance between the female and male energy, I would say. But Nils, what about leadership? How would leadership look in that wild garden and in that meta system you are talking about?
Yeah, for many people it's obvious, and it's called in Dutch dooddoener, that you need a strong leader to build partnerships, because building partnerships is very complex. It's not easy. Not everybody in your organization will like it. Yeah, they will have doubts. So the leader has to inspire and keep the herd together, if I would say so. But when we think about leadership, in the past, most leaders, CEOs, they had certain roles, inspiration roles towards the company, performance roles, to make the right decisions, to allocate the resources. We think in the future there will become more important to the third role. And the third role are connecting roles, becoming a trust builder inside and outside the company, becoming a co-architect of the meta system, because we already told that the leader has to be personally involved. So he should be a co-architect of this meta system. Again, something that cannot be delegated. And that will be combined with being the face of the company in the meta system and for the company itself. So the pink tasks will become more and more important. And then we got the insight, because, you know, many people talk about AI, tech, data, and that this will become more important. And this is true. Yeah, the AI and tech and data, if you don't have it, your business and your meta system will be in big troubles. But the paradox is the following: the more AI and tech and data enabled you will become, the more we can focus on being human again, because we will be freed up from all the tasks that the robots and the artificial intelligence can do better and faster. And we will have to use this time, and we will have the opportunity to use this time to build human connections again, to understand each other, yeah, to collaborate, yeah. And I do hope that companies that find this efficiency in AI and data just not continue to slice people away, because we have seen over the past decades a tendency to dehumanize business, yeah. And that has led that it has become quite a challenge to still find time to connect and to build partnerships.
I couldn't actually agree more with you, Nils, but Dado, another important question is, of course, how can we find the right partners for our own meta systems? How can we engage with them? What would be your advice?
Yeah, indeed, very good question. So it's important to think who your partners can be. It's also important to think out of the box. It can be governments, can be players in the same customer journey. It can be players in your value chain or outside your value chain. It can be the financial institutions. It can even be competitors. Remember the quotes, it's important to know when to compete. Of course, startups and scale-ups can be a very interesting partner to drive speed in your organization. Can also be universities and other educational entities. Can be big tech players. Think about the partnership between Walmart and Microsoft in the US to build on digital transformation together. It can be your customers, B2B, B2C, and it can, of course, be many different other partners. What we try to do is to create 5 lenses to scout for the right partners, because you can define which type of partners you need, but then you also need to find the right ones. And so we defined 5 different lenses to look through. One of them is to follow the strategy. So can you find partners who are trying to build the same roadmap to the future? Another one is technology. Can you tap into other partners that have a specific technology that is complementary to yours? Of course, data. Can you find players that have data that can be combined with yours to create shared insights? And for that, I think it's very important, especially in the European region or in Belgium particularly, we are too small to have enough data. So it's very important to combine our resources there and not to protect it as a pot of gold. And then you have the 2 most important lenses, in our opinion. One of them is people. I already said before that Partnerships are not being built between companies, but between people. So you need to find the people with the right same values. And then, of course, last but not least, the purpose. So can you find players that are working or heading to the same purpose as you are? Just a few examples. So follow the strategy. Of course, we had the example of Proximus and Belfius. If you think about following the data, it's quite interesting, by the way, to read the book of Jack Ma, the founder of Alibaba, in which he talks about the golden triangle or the iron triangle. And the iron triangle has 3 dimensions. So he said, I'm building an ecosystem on the layer of logistics, on the layer of finance, and on the layer of e-commerce. And within those 3 angles, he builds his partnerships and his ecosystems. So it's amazing to see people know the name of Alibaba, but there is actually a plethora of companies underneath and partnerships underneath to fulfill those 3 elements and to build the data that he needs. An example of following the technology is Picnic. Picnic is an online retailer in groceries in the Netherlands, and they have a partnership with Zalando that if they bring you the groceries, they can collect the packages of Zalando that you don't need, and they bring them back. So it's a nice example of technology, in this case physical vans, to form a partnership. The purpose, think again about the loop between Unilever and Procter & Gamble, which is an example we already discussed, and then people. And in Belgium, many of you know Wouter Torfs, the CEO of Schoenen Torfs. He is very connected to Bart Klaas, the CEO and family owner of JBC. Then there is also Joost Callens, who is the founder of Durabrick. And these different leaders really share the same values, which leads not only to a human connection, but also to a business connection that drives value. Now, to get to those 5 lenses, you of course need the right people to then set up those partnerships. And we actually see 2 important roles that you should think about if you want to engage in the meta system. The first one is the broker of trust. And the broker of trust is not somebody who is on your payroll or working for your organization, but it is someone who can bring the right partners together, somebody who knows where to find the same DNA and the same value. And it's a very important role. It's quite intangible, but we've seen throughout the networks that have been built that the role of the broker of trust is very important. And then you have the partnership manager. And the partnership manager is actually working for the organization, and he or she needs to scout for the right partnerships. But also, once the deal is formed, he or she has to nurture those partnerships, evaluate them, and see how you can adjust, how you can pivot, and how you can create that combined value. Now, one of the things we also learned from Chris Burggraven is a concept he called the hunger model. So he said, if you think about the meta system, you can think about a big network, but it starts on a very small, let's say, micro scale. And so the 3 phases that we see to actually build your partnership once you have found them through those lenses is what we call the chat, date, and marry phase. So the smallest step to start is actually to talk to as many people and organizations as you can. So start getting out there, get out of the building as much as you can. Then find the right partners to set up a first project or a small initiative. One of the quotes we heard from Fredo, one of the interviewees, was, instead of trying to go across the ocean, start building the boat. And that's, I think, what we need to do in the dating phase. Start building something small to explore whether it can actually work. And then you can move to the marry phase, where you go for a strategic partnership, a joint venture, an investment, or something else.
We have been listening to you, and you were talking about certain companies really on one purpose, they are making a collaboration. And I wonder, is it still a dream scenario, or is there an example somewhere of a company that is already heading towards that full collaboration model in this aspect?
Yes, it's a good question, Suyin. So when we wrote the book on digital transformation back in 2013, a lot of companies asked us, do you know any good example? And at that time, it was very early in the process, so there were not too many companies who were a good example of digital transformation. So right now, there are not too many meta systems, let's say, to already refer to, but we've picked one case that we also described in the book, which many people haven't heard about, and it's Haier. And Haier is a Chinese company, very traditional, so they're a home appliance maker. They have a revenue of around $32 billion, and they employ around 75,000 people. So it's a huge company that was structured in a very traditional way. And the CEO of Haier said, we need to change this model. So the manufacturing industry cannot be only about products anymore. Products will become more and more worthless. It will be the ecosystem that will be the most valuable. And what really inspired us is the philosophy at Haier. And it has three components: Ren, Den, Hei. And Ren stands for every employee, which is typically very entrepreneurial, needs to understand the needs of the user. So they don't call it customer, but user. And we need to focus on the value creation. And we need to do that by building a connection through an ecosystem of solutions. And that's really the philosophy that he tried to deploy. And his ambition was to create zero distance between the people working in the organization and what they called the users. And typically that's not the case. If you have a big corporate, there's a huge distance between the HQs and the actual customers that are buying the products or the services. And so what he did to make that very practical is he split his entire company into an internal ecosystem of 4,000 micro enterprises. And so these 4,000 micro enterprises have around 15 to 20 people each, with, again, always an entrepreneur who also has part of the equity. And they are not very small. So 70% of those micro enterprises do around 20 million USD in turnover. And so basically, if you think about Haier, what they did is they were a very top-down pyramid, a typical structure for a corporate. They split that out into micro enterprises, and they combine them in what they call platforms. So not technology platforms, but they try to find the micro enterprises that can really work together. And then you have a platform around that to share knowledge and insights. So it's not a boss that is ruling that platform. It's somebody who tries to create shared knowledge. And so basically what Haier today has become is a combination of around 20 platforms of all these different micro enterprises. And so they're not only internally built as an ecosystem, they also try to engage with the meta system around them. So they have a lot of different open platforms where they ask for feedback to customers, where they work with outside partners through open APIs, etc. So for us, Haier is one of the best examples today of a very traditional business that really deployed the ecosystem philosophy internally and also connecting with the meta system around them. This is a nice quote to end the Haier case. The CEO says, basically every empire that has been built has fallen down. And so with the Ren Den Hei model, we want to move away from being an empire to much more of a rainforest, I think the wild garden ecosystem.
Very nice example indeed. Maybe briefly before we have to think about ending this launch, Nils, do you have any idea of who could and who should be front runners to jumpstart this meta system idea here in our regions?
Yeah, we think of three types of organizations. First, the family-owned businesses. And for the key reason that they have a long-term vision and very stable leadership. In many corporates, the survival time of a CEO is between 5 to 7 years. In family business, this goes in decades. It stays within the family. So this is, creates many advantages for networking and for stability. The second type of companies, or it's not a company, actually is a government. Yeah, we think that government should move from a regulator role to add a role of orchestrator. They have to build the ecosystems, and they have to inspire and to support. Yeah, and that's an additional role they can take upon themselves. And finally, you have the companies inspired by purpose, because purpose helps to bring companies together. helps to mobilize not only the leaders, but also the people within the company. So those three types of organizations have the most, are the best placed to build a meta system.
Suyin,
do you have a technical problem or closing?
We can't hear you. You're muted, Suyin. Okay, I will maybe take over for a second. So Nils and myself also thought about how can we practice what we preach. So it makes no sense to write about something and then not adopting it yourself. So we thought about this concept of more than for profit and how can we do this as a business. And so actually what we want to do is we want to support Mobile School, which is an initiative by Streetwise. And what they actually do is in 28 countries around the world, they try to educate street kids by creating those mobile schools who can navigate through the city. So as a starting point, we want to donate €1,000 that was actually also foreseen for the physical events to the Mobile School of Streetwise. And we will also share part of the profit that we make through the book with this very interesting initiative, which I would really recommend to find out more about. It's a Belgian initiative, but it has a global reach, and it's a very interesting concept, because education ultimately is the driver of society if we want to move beyond. So that's why we choose Mobile School and Streetwise as the initiative that we want to support through this book in our more than for profit concept.
It's very, very nice to see that both of you are really men that walk your talk. And if you think about a higher purpose, you have a great purpose here. So I would suggest all those people to, of course, buy the book. And all the people that are following us right now, they can order the book and get a 50% discount. You find all the information on the slides. And for those that have maybe some time to stay a little bit more, I would have some very short personal questions still for both of you. Dado, this is your first book, your third book, Nils' first book, I mean. Third book. What makes this a different book, or is this book also part of the whole idea that you have been describing already in your two first books?
Yeah, so the first book was on digital transformation, in which we basically described a model on how motherships and big oil tankers could reinvent their engine room. So we try to help companies by becoming much more digital in the core of their business. And so we use this metaphor of the mothership on the sea. And then in 2018, I wrote this book with Omar Mohout on corporate venturing, which was about how you can engage as a traditional business with startups and scale-ups around you. And then we used the metaphor of the speedboats that could be next to the motherships, heading into the same direction. And so what we think is that this book is basically about the motherships coming together, bringing their fleets together to create mutual value. So that's how I see the connection. Basically, it has always been about reinventing your business. And we've moved from doing it internally by yourself, by working together with smaller players like startups and scale-ups. And now we think and we believe that we should think collaboration in a much wider sense to actually get to the destination that we hope to reach.
Okay, interesting. Nils, for you, it was your first book. We have been talking already a little bit in the beginning that it's a little bit like a kind of marriage for a certain amount of time. How did you manage to get at this point that the book is ready and ready to be sent out to the world?
Yeah, it was a journey with ups and downs. It was very nice to work with Dado because he's quite different from myself, quite complementary. We kept each other going. He's more a night person. I'm more a morning person. Sometimes he wore me out and I wore him out. He's very good in conceptualizing and visualizing ideas. So I thought it was a very nice marriage. And basically, we are going to celebrate after this session. We have planned to do a big lunch together.
Yeah.
Okay. I think it's time for us to wrap up. I've been seeing some interesting questions already in the chat. So for those that did not follow us in the beginning, we cannot take all your questions as we want to keep this in a certain time frame, but we created a LinkedIn group. And in the LinkedIn group, you will be able to post all your questions, of course, and Dado and Nils will get back to you. Don't forget, of course, to order your books and to read it and share all the ideas you have about it with the authors. As said, you have a special discount for those following us today. And maybe one last question. Nils, why should people buy this book?
Yeah, we hope that first by reading this, that they will start believing in trust. Trust has the quality, the more you give, you don't lose it, but you get more. And we also hope that more companies will take up the philosophy of more than for profit. Yeah, because the essence of a purpose-led company is to combine making profit with doing good.
Okay, I still have a last one for you, Dado. How do you feel now that the launch is almost over? Is there anybody you would like to thank today?
Yeah, so I'm very happy, and again, thanks to all the people following and still making the time for our story. So we of course want to thank the people who also proofread the book. There are 10 people who helped us to let's say get to the last mile and to shape the final ideas. But I especially also want to thank my colleagues at Scopernia, our organization which is helping companies in this domain. So there are a lot of different people, and really I want to thank them from the bottom of my heart, because they did an immense work to help us with research, to help us to shape the ideas, the slides, and so forth. So thank you to all my friends at Scopernia. I also want to thank my business partner, Joko Dro, who has been my compagnon de route, let's say, in the past 10 years. He has been an inspiration to me. And Nils already thanked me, but I also want to thank him, and I see that he's here suddenly in the room with me. So I have to say it was a very interesting journey to write this book with Nils. But not just this book. I had the pleasure to work with Nils in our organization, and I have to say there are a few business mentors in my life that have inspired me, and Nils is absolutely one of them. So now he's the CEO of Milkobel. So I wish him all the best in this new journey, but I also want to thank him especially for the very nice 2 years that we spent and the impact he made on my thinking.
Yeah, and I want to conclude by thanking first my wife Peggy for all the support she gave me and allowing me to work nights and weekends on the book, and also my friends and family, which I used as guinea pigs for ideas without them knowing it. And they all contributed unconsciously to this book. So thank you very much.
Thank you, both of you, Dado and Nils. And I want to wish you all great success by reading the book, but both of you, great success with the journey that is now there for you. I hope we will see you soon on stage, maybe together to talk about the ideas of the book together, or one on the stage and the other in the audience. I hope that also everybody gets inspired by reading this book. Read it first and then go out there. Go out there in that wild garden. Trust people, give the trust, and you will get the trust back. So I hope we can meet very soon live, because I will not be able to join them in the other room today, but I will drink a glass of champagne tonight on the success of your book. Take care, and hope to see you very soon. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone. Voilà. Oh. Dat ging goed, hè?